When Grant Kincaid told me he had invited Serena Maddox to my sister's engagement dinner, he stood barefoot in our Denver kitchen, stirring cream into coffee like he had not just placed another woman between us. He kept his voice soft, the way men do when they want permission before admitting what they already decided. Serena was an old friend, he explained. Someone going through a hard season. Someone who deserved warmth around decent people again. Then he looked at me over the rim of his mug and added, "If you trust me, Allison, you'll understand." I remember the phone lying face down beside his elbow, still and black, like it had not lit up with her name after midnight 2 nights earlier. I remember the way his thumb rested near it, possessive even in stillness, as if the truth might crawl out if he moved too slowly. Meredith's engagement dinner was supposed to be small, warm, and private, in the back room of Peter's favorite family restaurant. Grant was not asking to bring a guest. He was testing whether I would smile while he carried his replacement through my family's front door. So I smiled, because women like me learn early that a calm face can buy more truth than a raised voice ever will. I touched the edge of my coffee cup and gave him exactly what he wanted, saying, "If it matters to you, then I'm fine with it." Relief crossed his face so quickly it almost embarrassed him, and for 1 second, I saw how little resistance he had expected from me. What Grant did not know was that I had already found Owen Calder's number the night before, and by my sister's dinner, Serena's husband would walk into that restaurant behind the lie Grant thought I had swallowed. I did not start with Serena's messages, because women like Serena rarely leave the truth in one clean place. I started with a photo she posted from a narrow little wine bar near South Broadway. Smiling over a glass of red on the same night, Grant claimed he was meeting a restaurant vendor in Boulder. Her caption said nothing dangerous, just something about soft lighting and second chances. But the corner of Grant's gray sleeve showed beside her elbow. When I asked him the next morning whether the vendor dinner had gone late, he kissed my forehead and answered, "Too late, but worth it," while Serena's bracelet caught the light in the back of my mind. The bracelet was the next thread, because I had seen the charge before I had seen it on her wrist. Grant had explained it as a thank you gift for a community partner, something tasteful for a woman who helped secure a private dining contract. I remembered nodding at the kitchen counter while rinsing a mug, because disbelief sometimes arrives so quietly you mistake it for politeness. 3 days later, Serena wore that same thin gold bracelet in a public post about helping women rediscover themselves after hard endings, and I stared at the picture until the hypocrisy stopped feeling shocking. After that, the evidence came in scraps small enough for Grant to dismiss and precise enough for me to keep. A valet charge near Serena's apartment landed on our shared card after he said a tasting ran late downtown. A reservation confirmation went to our family email because Grant had once used it for Meredith's birthday dinner and never changed the autofill. A cream wool coat appeared on Serena's page the week after Grant told me an expensive boutique charge was for a client raffle. I did not follow him, break into anything, or become the kind of woman he would later try to describe as unstable. I just saved what they had already made careless, because people who feel protected by your kindness eventually stop hiding well. At my job, I helped women rebuild resumes after men had made them doubt their own memories, and I knew the shape of that sentence before Grant finished saying it. He was only helping an old friend, and Serena was only having a hard season, but the receipts were already telling a cleaner story than either of them could. I went to Meredith's apartment with a paper bag from Peter's bakery, because pretending I had brought breakfast made walking through her door easier. She opened it in leggings and one of Peter's old sweatshirts, her engagement ring catching the morning light as she hugged me. The bag sat untouched on her kitchen island while I placed my phone between us and let the first photo fill the screen. Serena smiled from the wine bar with Grant's sleeve beside her elbow, and Meredith's face changed before she said a word. I showed her the bracelet next. Then the valet charge. Then the reservation confirmation Grant had forgotten was still tied to our family email. Meredith did not cry, which somehow made it worse. Because my sister had cried over commercials and lost dogs and bad airport reunions. She just sat very still, one hand over her mouth, while the woman Grant wanted to bring into her engagement dinner became less imaginary with every swipe. When she finally breathed again, her voice came out flat and careful. "Allison, are you sure this is what it looks like?" I wanted to tell her no, because no would have been kinder to both of us for at least another hour. Instead, I tapped the date on the reservation, then the date on Serena's post, and watched Meredith understand before I answered. I wish I wasn't. I gave her, keeping my voice steady because the timestamps were steadier than I felt. She looked toward the unopened bread on the counter, and I knew she was seeing the room Peter had chosen, the people he had invited, the night Grant had decided to use. He does not get to do that, Meredith finally breathed, and her ring hand curled against the table like she was holding herself in place. I reminded her that this was her engagement dinner, not mine, and I would not let my pain become the thing people remembered. She looked back at me with the same stubborn face she had worn at 12 when someone tried to talk over her. If he brings her in as family, then the truth comes in the same door, she answered. And for the first time that morning, I stopped feeling alone. I met Owen Calder 2 days later at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the legal aid office where he worked. He arrived in a navy sweater, no wedding ring on his finger, and the face of a man who had already lived through the first shock alone. I had rehearsed a careful opening in the parking lot, something gentle enough for a stranger whose life I might be breaking. But when I said Serena Maddox, his eyes lowered to my phone, and he murmured, "You're Allison Breyer." That was the moment I understood he had not been waiting for proof, only for the other half of it. Owen did not raise his voice, did not ask whether Grant was lying, did not perform the disbelief people expect from wounded husbands. He opened a thin folder beside his coffee and slid out a printed calendar marked in small black ink. "I started writing things down when her stories began changing shape," he said, and the steadiness of his voice made the table feel colder. We laid our timelines beside each other, and the lies matched with an ugliness too neat to ignore. The night Grant claimed a vendor dinner ran late in Boulder was the same night Serena told Owen she had a client styling session downtown. The weekend Grant called a restaurant scouting trip was the weekend Serena said she needed space to reset her head. Owen tapped one date with his finger and looked at me, not cruelly, just tired, saying, "They made fools of us in different rooms." I told him Grant planned to bring Serena to Meredith's engagement dinner, and Owen closed his eyes like that detail had finally finished something. He made one rule before I could explain mine: no private photos, no threats, no ugly spectacle, nothing that made us smaller than them. I nodded because that was exactly what I wanted. A clean truth in a public room, not a dirty fight in the dark. Owen folded the calendar back into his folder and said, "If my wife walks in as his harmless old friend, then I'll walk in as her husband." The restaurant Meredith chose sat on a quiet Denver corner with brick walls, low amber lights, and the kind of worn wooden tables that made strangers lower their voices. Peter had brought sourdough from his own bakery that morning, and the staff placed warm baskets between white flowers and small candles. It was not fancy in the way Grant liked, which meant nobody there needed the room to prove they mattered. That was why his plan felt worse, because he had chosen a family table, not a public stage. To make Serena look harmless, Grant arrived with one hand pressed lightly to my lower back, wearing a new charcoal suit and too much cologne for a room serving garlic, butter, and bread. He kissed Meredith's cheek, clapped Peter on the shoulder, and moved through the guests with that polished warmth he used for restaurant owners and city donors. Every few minutes, his eyes cut toward the entrance, then back to me with a smile that asked whether I had noticed. I smiled back because I had noticed everything, including the way Meredith's fingers tightened around Peter's when Grant checked the door again. Serena Maddox walked in 20 minutes later, wearing a cream dress, soft enough to look innocent, and expensive enough to make the innocents feel planned. Grant crossed the room too quickly, then slowed himself near the doorway, as if remembering he was supposed to look casual. He brought her to Meredith first, saying Serena had heard so much about her, and Serena smiled like she had earned a place in that sentence. "Congratulations, Meredith," she offered, using my sister's name with a practiced warmth that made Peter look down at their joined hands. Then Grant guided Serena toward the center of the room, where my parents were greeting relatives and the first family photos were about to begin. He introduced her as an old friend, almost family, and I watched my mother's smile hold steady by sheer force of upbringing. Serena touched my arm and said, "Allison, it's so good to finally be here," as if the word finally had not exposed more than she intended. Across the room, Meredith's eyes found mine, and neither of us moved because the truth was already on its way through the front door. Owen Calder entered when Grant was guiding Serena toward the family photos, his hand resting near her back like he had forgotten whose room he was in. The door opened quietly, but Serena heard it before most people turned, and her smile collapsed so fast it felt almost physical. She saw Owen standing beside the hostess stand in a dark coat, one hand around the same thin folder he had brought to coffee. Grant looked irritated first, then confused, then suddenly empty, because Serena's face had explained the stranger before anyone said his name. I stepped away from my mother and crossed the room before Grant could reach for my arm. Owen met me near the end of the long table, and the silence followed us like water finding the lowest place. Serena whispered, "Owen," with such naked fear that every person nearby understood she had not expected her husband at my sister's engagement dinner. I kept my voice low and clear, because the room did not need volume anymore. "This is Owen Calder, Serena's husband." Grant's mouth opened, but Meredith cut through him before he could turn the moment into damage control. "No, Grant, you do not get to say this is not the time when you made my engagement dinner her introduction," she said, still holding Peter's hand. Owen looked at Serena, not with rage, but with the exhausted steadiness of a man who had already buried the first version of his marriage. "You were brought here as his harmless old friend," he said. "So I came as the husband you left out of that story." Serena tried to smile, but the bracelet on her wrist flashed under the amber light, and I saw her realize I was looking at it. "This is being twisted," she managed, while Grant reached for my elbow and told me we needed to speak privately. Peter stepped between us before I had to move, calm enough to make Grant look smaller without raising his voice. "You brought it into this room," Peter said, "so you do not get to drag her into a hallway and rewrite it." My mother's hand found Meredith's shoulder, and my father stared at Grant like a man watching a bill come due. I took the printed reservation from my purse, folded once, and laid it on the table beside Owen's folder. "There are dates, charges, photos, and messages," I said, because I wanted facts, not screaming, to be the last thing Grant heard from me. Serena stopped protesting then, and in that quiet, the family photo space beside Meredith became exactly what Grant had made it: evidence. Grant and Serena did not leave because anyone shouted them out. They left because the room no longer had a single soft place for them. My mother asked the hostess to bring Grant's coat with a politeness so sharp it made the younger cousins stop whispering. Serena tried to lift her chin, but the bracelet on her wrist kept catching the light like a witness she could not silence. One of my aunts, a retired school principal who had corrected liars for 30 years, looked at her and said, "Some doors should embarrass the people who open them." Serena turned to Owen then, reaching for the only role she had left, and accused him of watching her like she had not built this mess herself. Owen did not flinch, did not raise his voice, and did not give her the drama she needed to look harmed. He tapped the folder once and answered, "These are your messages, your public posts, our shared charges, and the dates you handed me yourself." The words landed harder than anger, because nobody in that room had to imagine anything after hearing what he had actually kept. Grant looked at me next, and for one breath, I saw him searching for the old version of me who would rescue him from embarrassment. That woman would have softened the room, pulled him aside, apologized for the discomfort, and helped him turn the truth into a misunderstanding. I stood beside Meredith instead, feeling Peter's steady presence near her shoulder, and let Grant understand that I was finished managing his image. My father opened the door himself. Not violently, not theatrically, just wide enough for Grant to see there was no conversation left inside. After they walked out, nobody clapped, because real families do not celebrate when something ugly finally shows its face. The restaurant stayed quiet until Meredith reached for Peter's hand and breathed like someone returning to her own night. Then my mother asked the staff to serve dinner, and that simple sentence gave the room permission to belong to my sister again. By morning, Serena had lost 2 styling clients who had been sitting near the dessert table, and Grant's regional manager had heard enough to make his community-facing job impossible. They did not fall because I pushed them. They fell because every person in that room saw exactly where they had chosen to stand. I did not spend the weeks after Meredith's dinner trying to make Grant suffer, because the room had already done what I never could. I moved out of our apartment with 2 suitcases, 3 boxes of work files, and a calm that felt strange against my ribs. A family attorney helped me unwind the lease, separate the shared bills, and cancel every wedding vendor before deposits became arguments. Grant sent one message asking if we could talk like adults, and I deleted it while standing in a laundromat beside my winter coats. His restaurant group placed him on leave first, then quietly moved someone else into the community-facing role he had loved showing off. Serena lost clients faster than she expected, because women rebuilding themselves after divorce do not hire someone who treated another woman's home like an opening. Owen filed for divorce with the same clean steadiness he had brought into that restaurant, and he sent one email afterward, thanking me for choosing facts over spectacle. I answered with 2 words: be well, because some people are only meant to stand beside you at the exact moment truth needs a witness. Meredith married Peter 4 months later in a small room above his bakery, where the windows smelled faintly of rain and warm bread. She wore a simple dress. He cried before the vows, and nobody mentioned Grant because his absence had become easier than his presence ever was. When Meredith squeezed my hand before walking in, she whispered, "You look peaceful," and I realized she was right. I had not been chosen again, but I had been returned to myself, and that felt better than being wanted by someone careless. Some mornings now, I sit at my desk before the women in my program arrive, looking at the empty chair across from me. I think about how many of us are taught to protect the room, even when the room is being used against us. Then I open the first folder, greet the first woman who is trying to begin again, and remember exactly what beginning again sounds like. It sounds quiet, ordinary, and honest enough to stay. If this story stayed with you, thank you for listening until the end. Sometimes, peace begins when we stop protecting people who already knew they were hurting us. Share your thoughts below, because someone reading your words may need the courage to choose herself today and start again.